Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Smith. I'm the president of the Forage Center for Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Education, and I welcome you today to this Forage Center conversation with Duncan Ball, who is the country director for Handicap International. So we're pleased to have Duncan with us. He's a master's in science graduate from the University of East London and is currently the country director for Ukraine for Handicap International. And I'm really interested in learning about the work of Handicap International. One of the things I want to, before I forget, is one of the things that's really important to us is always thinking about what I would say are at least underrepresented or marginalized populations that are migrants and refugees that we often don't think about. And if you're focusing on the handicap or the disabled population, I think that's really good work. He was formerly the country director in Yemen. He was also the head of mission in Médecins du Monde in Iraq. And he has been, for a long time, a proponent of advancing humanitarian careers. He established in 2020 the website humanitariancareers.com, which I invite people to go to. He is no longer the owner of that website, but that is really a great portal and a great site for getting information about humanitarian careers and finding out about careers. Let's start it off. So, Duncan, glad that you were here. Thank you for being here. I understand that you're in Kyiv, and you were telling me before we started it's very cold today, but you are in the epicenter of certainly a major conflict we've been dealing with many years. And it seems like you're going from conflict to conflict. So Yemen, Iraq, Kyiv, you're like right in what's happening. So if you could tell us, I'd like to really just start off if you can give us a kind of a sketch of your own humanitarian career, maybe starting from graduate school, what led you into this. Talk a little bit about your deployments, and then certainly tell us about the work of Handicap International and what you are engaged in Kyiv. So take it over.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you, David, for inviting me and for the Forage Center for organizing this event. It's a great pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm in one of these old Kyiv apartments where the ceiling is 2 stories high and the echo is pretty loud. So I will do my best to be. So I'm Duncan Ball. I'm the country director for Handicap International in Ukraine. In the US, we go by the name Humanity and Inclusion. We have different names in different locations. So if you're looking for our US branch, we're known as Humanity and Inclusion. So my origin story, how did I sort of get into the sector? In some way, a very typical story of how people start careers in the humanitarian sector, and in some ways not typical at all. I did art as my undergrad, so I was a sculptor and a painter, which is not typical in many ways. I did not do well on my undergraduate degree, I'm afraid to say. So my tutors were not impressed by the artworks that I was making. I'd always been interested in international affairs. I traveled a lot. I'd volunteered a lot, which was kind of key, more just as a sort of thing to do as opposed to sort of any particular career ambition. But when I graduated from college, my parents, who were always very loving and supportive, put a little bit of pressure on me to try and find a proper job, a little bit lost with what to do. And then I became incredibly lucky, which is, I think, a key thing that a lot of people who fall into the sector have, is I applied for only one job, which was a job at Save the Children, one of the largest NGOs in the world, in London, in their HQ, to be their travel administrator. It's like an in-house travel agent. You just book the flights all day. And I know when I was offered that job, the woman who offered it to me has very much been my mentor, said, you were the least qualified person who applied for this. But I guess she needed somebody quick, and she saw something in a 24-year-old me. And then once I got in, I was like, this is incredible. This is what I want to do. I just want to be on the other end of these flight bookings. And since then, it's really just been a case of kind of leapfrogging my way up. I did a master's to actually get some relevant qualifications. And from there, I did my first overseas mission in Greece in 2015 with a refugee crisis based in Lesbos. And then I was in Syria in 2019 with Médecins du Monde, in Bangladesh with the Rohingya crisis as a head of mission. And then a long time in Iraq. I was the field coordinator for MDM in Mosul, and then stepped into the head of mission role before coming over to Handicap International and spending nearly a year and a half, 2 years in Yemen. And then I've been in Ukraine here for nearly a year.
Tell us a little bit about Handicap International, or the US version, how you operate as the country director. I mean, you have a large staff. Kind of tell me kind of operationally and then kind of the mission of Handicap International.
So Handicap International is a French international organization. Our mandate is focused on persons with disabilities and, importantly, the root cause of disabilities in many crisis and conflict and humanitarian zones. So we really, as an organization, we work in about 62 countries, and our main work is really divided into two areas. We have a health component, which really focuses on physical rehabilitations and prosthetics and orthotics for people who lose a limb. A lot of people think of Handicap International, they see the kind of the people with the new legs. That's very much what we're kind of famous for. And we also do a lot of work around mental health for people with disabilities and crises, and also on inclusion. So looking at the wider humanitarian response and trying to make it more inclusive for persons with disabilities. And then the other side is we also do landmine and landmine clearance and explosive ordnance education. So dealing with a lot of the risks and the causes of persons with disabilities in places such as Ukraine and Yemen is landmines and unexploded ordnance. So we also have a large division that focuses on armed violence reduction, as we call it, but you could call it humanitarian mine action. Here in Ukraine, we're about 300 staff, and we have our main coordination office based here in Kyiv, but really our field offices are really hugging the front line. So our field offices are in Kharkiv, close to the Russian border, at Dnipro, where we work down in Zaporizhia and Donetsk, and then in the south in Mykolaiv, where we work in Kherson.
All right. So you have a physical office in Kyiv, or you're working virtual?
No, we own quite a large physical office. We've got about 60 staff based here.
And are you visiting the country? I mean, you're based in Kyiv.
Yeah. So as a country director, you're the boss of everything. Technically, I am the most senior person for HI, Handicap International in Ukraine. So the job is really, I line manage the senior leadership team. So I have a head of logistics, a head of finance, a head of HR, a head of security. They all report to me. And then I also have a director in each of the field bases. So in Kharkiv and Dnipro, Mykolaiv, we have an area manager. They also report to me. And really the job is kind of twofold, really, in a sort of technical sense. It's basically the strategy and the management of the mission. So it's making sure that basically we're going in the direction we're supposed to be going, and that everything's running smoothly. The legal representative for HI in Ukraine, so I am the power of attorney, I represent the organization legally, and then also engagement with authorities here, so I meet the deputy ministers or engage with relevant authorities as we need, and then also donors and external relations, so anything if I need to meet, the EU or French government who provide us funds, that's also a key part of my job. But yeah, try and get out in the country as much as I can. I try and spend at least about 50% of my time riding the Ukrainian rail network and going out to the frontline operations.
Well, I'm interested. This is very important work, and it's obvious that it's necessary because of battlefield injuries, especially when you're talking about people who lose their limbs. Are there unique challenges in Ukraine? Maybe compare it to your last mission in Yemen, right? I mean, what are things that are a challenge for doing the work in Ukraine right now? I mean, obvious what's going on, but I mean, something's more specific. Yeah.
Yeah, Yemen and Ukraine, different contexts, probably about as different as you could possibly get in terms of how you work and the challenges that you would face. I think one of the really interesting things about the Ukraine context that I think humanitarians don't spend enough time thinking about is this is really a high income context. There's very much a state here. It's very it's more like trying to work in somewhere like the US than it would be, say, working somewhere like Yemen or South Sudan. So you have to really follow government regulation. There's a very strict labor law, hiring people, firing people, banking regulation. Any kind of work you want to do, you need the right permit, you need this. You don't get any kind of pass just because you're an international humanitarian organization. It's much more similar to, say, running a medium-sized company in Poland. And that poses a lot of challenges. You really spend a lot of time trying to navigate, Ukrainian legislation, which is complicated at best.
Okay. And Yemen, it was very different, I would imagine. It's not really.
In Yemen, so obviously Yemen is really two contexts. You have the south and the north, which really are quite different in so many ways. But there you are in many ways a more typical humanitarian context. The immediate needs are larger, in the sense that the basic needs of people are not being met in the same way, more across the whole country. In Ukraine, it's really those frontline communities. But in Kyiv, people are pretty much as well as they can be. In Yemen, the challenge was very much things like The government was in many ways more obstructive, so a lot more difficulty accessing communities. Here, we can go anywhere we want. As long as we're registered as a Ukrainian organization, we have no problem accessing in Yemen. There was much more blockages, particularly Ansar Allah, but the Houthis, as they're known, would be very much trying to interfere with the work, very much making life more difficult for humanitarians. And also just the sort of the working environment. It's much harder to do stuff in a place where the roads are not so good, or import regulation is difficult. There's not flights into Yemen, for example. So that also posed a lot of challenges.
In Ukraine, are you trying to evacuate people who have been seriously injured for operation somewhere else? Or tell us like what you're doing on an individual basis.
Yeah, so we have basically a series of components that we do here. So what we call our integrated health approach. That's physical rehabilitation and mental health support. That's working in health centers close to the front line. I mean, they are a bit further back. And that's providing physical therapy sessions to persons with disabilities to avoid them from having long-term disabilities. And then obviously mental health support. The inclusion work is, again, looking at the actual humanitarian response. So that's really engaging with other NGOs and helping them to make sure their work is inclusive. And then the mine action stuff is very much about, I need to be a little bit careful what I say about the mine action stuff. It's just a little bit sensitive, but it's surveying fields quite far back from the front line. We're not in any way close to the front line in that way, as we're humanitarian, deminers. But yeah, we work in areas where the fighting has moved on from to survey landmine fields.
But one of the things that changed in the humanitarian world, I think it really happened with Iraq, was there was this sense that humanitarian workers were safe no matter where they are. And that's not the case any longer, right? I mean, what do you do to make sure your own staff is safe? And I mean, it's not the same type of danger as it would be in Iraq. With the danger was different than it is in Ukraine, but tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, I think really there's no context now where humanitarian workers get that kind of, the old fashioned way where just having a red cross or a red crescent on your van, meant that you were seen as neutral, impartial. We have to prove ourselves as being, up to our core humanitarian standards now. I mean, here in Ukraine, we have a monitoring system for the air alerts, which in many ways is our biggest threat. So we have a 24-hour team monitoring activity, let's say. And we have quite a good system of making sure that our teams are able to access shelters, but they're careful when they move, but they move away from areas that might be attacked. But I mean, last week a WFP convoy was hit here, and a couple of weeks ago a Danish Refugee Council demining team was hit. So it's definitely not a context safe for humanitarians.
Yeah, my impression, and maybe this is talking to students of mine, is that there's almost this contradiction that exists in places like Kyiv. You've got these air warning systems, but people can still go out and get a coffee and have lunch somewhere. Yeah. Kind of thing. It's like two things are operating with each other, right?
I mean, to be based in Kyiv is the nicest place in the world to be a humanitarian. I mean, you can do development work and you can go and live in Nairobi, but if you want to be a frontline humanitarian, it doesn't get much nicer than Kyiv. It does get harder as you get closer to the front line, Kharkiv and Dnipro, and obviously places like Zaporizhia and Donetsk and Kherson are much more challenging. But to be based in Kyiv or Dnipro you're pretty lucked out if this is you kind of got the best of both worlds, really.
Do you speak Ukrainian, or are you learning Ukrainian, or you're operating in English?
Enough to ingratiate myself, but not enough to have a conversation.
So let me ask you this, because we talked a little bit about this beforehand. I'm always curious about the life of a humanitarian professional, right? The students that are here are in the United States and they have families, and at some point kind of address how they would be where you are. But tell me a little bit about that. We were talking about deployments. You get a couple weeks off. You were saying sometimes you go back to the UK to visit family. Sometimes you're going somewhere else to have vacation. Illustrate a little bit of that for us, what that's like.
Yeah, so the pretty typical in the industry with our setup when it comes to like hardship missions such as this. It does depend in different locations. Here, because we're a high risk location, obviously we have power cuts and we have bombs dropped on us. We do 8 weeks in Ukraine, and then we get 5 days of R&R. So that's guaranteed every 8 weeks, 5 days out of the country. And we receive a stipend from the organization, quite a generous one, to cover transport and hotels and everything out of the country. And then on top of that, we have 25 days of paid leave a year. So you can use your paid leave with your R&R. The way it basically works out is between 1, 2, or even 3 or 4 weeks out of the country every 8 weeks. It depends how you want to do it. Some people take, a few shorts, just 1 week R&Rs, and then ask, okay, I want a month off now. Some people do 2 weeks every 8 weeks. You get that flexibility to arrange it as yourself, but you're in the country for 8 weeks. That's quite a common rotation. Some places it's 6 weeks, some places it's 12, but usually it's a stint in country and then a nice stint out of it.
And you have to take a train out of Ukraine, then fly from there, right?
Yeah, so there's no flights in Ukraine at all. So we take a train from Kyiv either to Warsaw or to the border town in Poland, which I will not try and pronounce as it's spelt like PRZYL to Z. It's some town in Poland. You take the train to there, you transit from there. You can take a train to Krakow, and from there you can fly anywhere. I mean, coming in and out of Ukraine, it's 24 hours to get to Kyiv. It's 48 hours to get to Kharkiv or Dnipro. You get used to the Ukrainian rail network.
So before I turn it over, I want to ask you kind of one question. It is kind of a global question. And this is really just thinking, I mean, we recognize the humanitarian space has changed, right? And people will say it's because of one person, maybe, but it's changed in many ways. It's changed from funding, the needs. It's just, I mean, that could be a long conversation, right? So from where you sit, give me a sense of what you think are the challenges right now of doing your work and maybe opportunities that are being met. And then I'm going to bring everybody else in for questions.
I mean, I think from a humanitarian point of view, the major challenge is funding. I mean, it's not just US aid. There's reductions in the UK, there's reductions in France. I mean, pretty much across the board, most donors are reducing their funding. I think it's fair to say when the dust settles that the industry will probably be 50% smaller than it was January this year. And I can say my personal view, and I have no foresight on this I have no foresight on this whatsoever. My personal view is that 50% is not coming back. We will remain 50%. So whatever there was in January, program wise, job wise, funding wise, opportunity wise, there's now half of that. I'm working personally on that assumption, and I think it's a pretty bleak picture, but I don't think delusion when it comes to programmatically or delusion within our careers is going to help any of us. So yeah, half the industry's just gone poof.
Is there a trend? I mean, I keep hearing about privatization, and what I mean is that most NGOs are not for profits, they're getting foundation money and so forth, but there's this sense of, is there privatization that could take place in the field? What do you think?
Potentially. And it's interesting, the demining sector is the sector that's moved the most in that direction, where private sector actors have moved in. I mean, I think the main thing is a lot of NGOs are trying to acquire funding from other sources. Some are more successful than others. The ones that are more successful are the ones that have already have a good track record of that. I think the ones that were really over-reliant on institutional funding, particularly institutional funding from only really one. I mean, some major NGOs had 80% of their funds was USAID. And for now, they're like, oh, how do we get other donors? It's like you scrambling around now is really going to leave some organizations in a very difficult situation. I mean, I think we have this period of chaos, which could last a year or two. I think it's starting to settle just a little bit, but I would say at least 2026 is going to be a continual year where there's a lot of flux. But yeah, I think more what I see more is NGOs remaining non-for-profit, but trying to seek funds from private sources.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, let's open up to questions. And the easiest way of doing this is just open your mic. I'm going to ask you, open your mic, introduce yourself, give us your name. If you can open your screen, that was great. Open your camera. If not, that's fine. Tell us where you're from or where you're connected to. So I don't see anybody open their mic. I see Jim did pose a question here. Jim, why don't you open your mic and ask the question would be better.
Hey, first off, thank you very much for spending the time to talk to us today. My question is with regards
Jim,
to
introduce yourself, Jim.
Oh, that was the first thing you said. Hey, I'm Jim Wilkie. I'm a graduate student here at the Carter School. Obviously a student of Dr. Smith there. So the question I have is with regards to the hardship tours, right? You call them hardship tours because you're in hardship environments there. You said 8 weeks, 5 days. Is that so? I'm a military guy, so when we go out for 12 months, whatever it is. You have hardship tours that are long. Can you talk us through us a little later on, longer in the tooth here? We're talking 8 weeks. Okay, 8 weeks. You're talking, well, you're there for 2-3 years with 8 weeks in country, 5 days out. That becomes less enticing, at least for the old guys like me. I can do a year maybe, but anything greater than that, you start really stretching that.
Yeah, and I think one of the contexts is having family too, right? That's a context to all this, right?
Definitely. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for the question. So all of the overseas work in the humanitarian sector, in hardship locations or in development locations, are all a fixed term contract. So you sign a contract with your organization for a set period of time. It really varies. So, for example, my contract here in Ukraine is 2 years. Probably maybe could have negotiated that to be shorter if I had thought about it, but assigned 2 years, it is what it is. My contract in Yemen, for example, was 18 months. Generally, the contracts, I think, hover around a 1 year length, but definitely organizations that offer 6 months and some offer even shorter. It's very much tied to the funding. So if you see an organization offering a 4-month contract, it's probably because they only have the funding for 4 months. Generally, the view is it's a year is a good way to think about it. I think most organizations, if they have the continual funding, they want somebody for at least a year because the recruitments take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and it takes at least 4, 5, 6 months to really get into the context, to understand what's going on. We don't have the time to be doing constant inductions and trainings and bringing people up to speed. So a year is a good ballpark figure to work with. And yeah, it would then be that year would be in 8-week segments and time off, 8 weeks in, time off, 8 weeks in, time off for the year.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask it. Let me follow up a question there, Duncan. A little bit on the personal side. What do you do in your days off? I mean, there are no such thing as days off. I mean, what is, there are things that distract you and kind of keep you sane. What are those things?
Kyiv is really not a typical duty station in that way. I mean, this is a huge modern European city. I mean, straight after this, I have a friend who's based in the south who's just passing through Kyiv, so I'll go straight round to the restaurant, have dinner with them, take a beer. I have a very nice gym. It's on the top of a shopping mall. I get a great view of the city. I'll go to an art gallery. I mean, here you can go to the ballet. It's fantastic. It's world class. It's not typical. So here I live a life very much like I would in London or New York, really, and it's very enjoyable for that sense. In somewhere like Yemen, it's you sort of make time. So exercise, physical and mental health, you call your family, you stay in touch, you develop humanitarian careers websites because you have a lot of time on your hand. You make hobbies, you make projects. But yeah, in some duty stations, there really is not a lot to do, and also very tight security regulations. So for example, in the south of Yemen, our curfew was 6 p.m. most days. So you literally couldn't, you cook dinner with your colleagues, you drank some tea, you maybe watch some Netflix, you go to bed, you do it all again. In that way, it's work is very intense. So in a place like that, at the end of the day, you're quite glad to kind of flop into your bed and watch some Netflix and get an early night. But it depends. You have to find ways to keep yourself, sane and going.
Yeah, I would think so. Thank you.
Just to quickly add on that, I think it's really important to add. Sorry, is you build amazing friendships. That's the other thing. So you spend a lot of time hanging out with other people. And the humanitarian sector is incredibly diverse. I mean, in Yemen, we had 30 expats, and I think we had 18 different nationalities represented. So, you'll spend a lot of time just sat in the guest house, just chatting with people, just put on some music, sit on the balcony, watch the sunset, and just chat to people. I think that's one of the things I love most about the sector, actually.
That's great. Good camaraderie there.
Yeah,
all right,
definitely.
Other questions? Other people open their mics? Shannon, yes, I was waiting for a question from you. Go, Shannon.
I always have questions. I study.
Introduce
my name is
yourself,
Shannon. I am. I'm actually about 2 days from being done with my master's degree. I'm editing the final paper right now. Anyway,
you're a student at Rutgers University.
At Rutgers, yes. So I study the Levant. So I study areas that do not like us. How do you deal with being in an area that doesn't really want you there in the first place? They don't want you helping the people.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think for me, having travel, this comes almost more from my travel experience, and then I'll sort of lead on to my humanitarian experience. almost everywhere I've been in the entire world, people are very good at separating the governments and the people. Really, people don't. I mean, in most places, I'm mistaken for American, so I kind of get off. Most people can't tell the difference between me and the
Accent and
I know
all. Accent
I'm
and all.
outraged by that as well, but and people really they will say to you, "I hate your government, but do you want to have some dinner?"
Oh,
They're very, very good at doing that. I think, also in a lot of places we work, there are not a lot of foreigners. So they're just more interested in the fact that you're foreign and that and a lot of these places, Yemen, for example, they don't get to travel. Most of them have never left Yemen. So meeting you and working with you is amazing for them. It's like they get to travel. So they'll just sit and ask you about like, everything, and particularly a lot of just stereotypes like, oh, I hear British food is really bad. Is it really that bad? It's at that kind of level. Most people are not sitting around thinking like,
eat
oh
fish
my
and
god,
chips every night, right?
exactly, right? Which is, yeah, I mean, we do, but it really isn't. Most people are not thinking on that kind of level, actually, I find,
Yeah.
even when it comes to the authorities. So obviously you get some contexts where they very much want the humanitarian support and you're very, very popular for being there. Here is one of them. A lot of people come to me and go, oh, you're foreign, what are you doing here? I say, oh, humanitarian. And we go, oh, thank you so much, you're doing so much. That's really great. Some places you get a really good response.
Mhm.
In other places, yeah, people are a bit more critical of the humanitarian response, but they're not angry at you about it. They just would rather just have a conversation about it.
Let me ask a follow-up. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt your own safety is threatened?
I've been very fortunate, almost never in a kind of in a sense, as in the times I felt the most unsafe is when it's been bombing.
Okay.
So when the US, so I was in Syria when Turkey invaded northeast Syria. That was really sketchy. You could hear the drones overhead, the convoy out. That was say the heebie-jeebies, as we say in English. Here, there's been 3 times here where I've not, it's been a little bit too close to for comfort. And I was in Yemen when US UK bombing started there. Well, it wasn't too bad, but yeah, I haven't had any kind of interpersonal. I've never been threatened. I've never been robbed or anything like that. I think it's particularly the contexts I've gone to have happened to be more, airstrikes over, robberies. But I've also worked for organizations with very good security and, we're professionals. So lack of incidents is a good thing.
You've taken security training. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. And a key part of a country director role is you are the ultimately security responsible for the whole mission.
okay.
So, I mean, in Yemen, when the curfew was 6 o'clock, it was 6 o'clock because I said it was 6 o'clock. So I
I
couldn't
see.
really complain.
Great. Questions, other questions, please.
Um,
Vivian, introduce yourself, plece.
yeah, so my name is Vivian Rigo. I'm from Kenya, Nairobi. I'm in Rutgers. I'm doing my master's. Shannon is my classmate. She's just a year ahead of me. My question is in regard to the job market. For some of us, of course, who come from these countries where aid is being given, we choose to do these courses because we sort of understand what is happening back home. But when it comes to getting the jobs, I mean, we don't get the jobs. You guys get the jobs. So what will you maybe like advise someone like me who, I mean, now I had to come here to do my master's so I can see if it's going to give me, like a step ahead when it comes to applying for jobs and yeah.
So I think this is, well, number one, love Nairobi, fantastic city, one of my favorite places in the world. So it's a great question. I think actually it's one of the, I was trying to think before the call, David opposed to me to think about opportunities that we have in the sector now with the new environment, let's say. I would say one of the only opportunities I can really think of is for nationals. So we divide the employment within the sector between international staff and national staff. So national staff will be people who come from the country. So if you were in Kenya, you'd be employed as a national staff. I'm an international staff or an expat because I come from the UK. There has been for a long time a huge move towards localization. So employing more local people, putting local people into positions of seniority, training up local people, capacity building. This has been a trend as far as for the 13 years I've seen in the sector, and it is only speeding up, and it's speeding up at an enormously fast pace. In fact, actually, I mean, You say the jobs come to us, I actually would dispute that first. So for example, here we have 300 staff. Originally, only 25 of them were internationals. So, 275 of them were Ukrainian. Actually, in Kenya, it's almost impossible now to get a job as an international person. So that was before this started. So really the opportunities are there for people from the global south to move into these jobs. And that's a trend that's only going to get more and more and more. I think actually the big fear is going to be people who want to do this as an international career. That window is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But I think there's enormous opportunities to be getting into the sector now.
Do you think this is happening because of the changes we've seen in the last year?
Yeah.
Now, and does this shift? Let me ask you a question, delicate question. What people are paid, right? Right.
Yeah.
If I'm Kenyan and I'm working in Nairobi for an international NGO based in London, am I getting paid different than if I was Duncan Ball working in Nairobi?
Yeah, this is a really challenging point. So first of all, there's two reasons why the localization agenda is moving forward so fast. One is because it's needed. I mean, nobody is going to be better responding to a crisis in Kenya than Kenyans. That's you know what I mean. The only value add you can really have for the international staff is if we have capacities that local people don't have, and that's why actually one of the big advices I would take to anybody who wants to do this as an international staff is to focus on core technical areas. You're not going to get a job as a general manager now as an international staff, but just any job that basically you can kind of just learn on the job. It's all being done by local people. You need to be a logistician, you need to be a medical coordinator, you need to be a nutritionist, you need to bring something that you can't just, like I wouldn't advise HR to be an area to move into. We can find HR people in almost every country in the world. We don't need to bring somebody from.
We can find a failed art major and have them.
Exactly, right? Well, I mean, I describe my career very much as a flying saucer, and I'm on the last, as the flying saucer takes off, I'm on the last rung as the ladder's retracted in. There's no way you could start my career now. Just by, So that's the first thing is, really the opportunities.
What comes to that is very specified intensive training. I mean, I'm just going to say I'm a nutritionist. You got to come with something, right?
Yeah. And I think the other reason why the localization agenda is being pushed so hard is because it's cheaper. Local people they're paid less, and there's a long discussion as to why that is. But also, you don't have to provide them I mean, here I get not only a salary, I get a hardship allowance, a per diem, an apartment, travel out of the country every 8 weeks, flights, accommodation. I mean, 4 of my international staff is probably 40 Ukrainians. We are unbelievably expensive, the international staff. We need pensions, we need to pay insurance, all of this kind of stuff. So, if I'm looking at downsizing my mission, the first thing I want to do is, do I have absolutely anybody local who can go into that job? If I do, I'm doing it because, it can get me, I need to keep my team in place. And if I can save 10 Ukrainians by getting rid of 1 international, I'll do it in a heartbeat, as long as the skills are there.
That's very revealing. It's a corporate model, right? In a sense.
But money dictates everything. I mean, if you only have a budget of 8 million, you can only have what 8 million the staff at 8 million will support. If I have a budget of 8 million supports 300 staff, I'd love to have 350 staff, but if there's no money, I can't pay them. So the budget and your ability to acquire grants, to get, the funding into your program completely dictates the size of your team. And therefore, national staff are great because not only do they bring, they have much better local knowledge, they have much better, understanding of humanitarian needs and all of the great things that local staff have. They are also cheaper, and there's no getting around that point, I think.
Other questions? Someone else open their mic, please.
Hey, Duncan, appreciate you joining us here today. I'm Chris Conklin. I'm a Carter student of Professor Smith's, but I'm also a former USAID employee. Actually, I just was recently furloughed, probably for the second time, but probably the last time here just the other day, not because of the shutdown, but because of everything that I'm sure it's been going on with the agency. And I actually did work on the response management team here in the States, supporting the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance field team over in Ukraine, the DART, we called it. I was just curious if you interfaced with them at all, if you'd maybe worked with the response in Ukraine from USAID, and just, now I'm on the outside, you're on the
Yeah.
outside, just kind of how you thought that went.
Yes. So
Yeah.
we were funded by DART. We
Mhm.
had BHA funding here. So here the BHA funded a consortium called Dorijka. For us, it was a consortium of 5 French organizations. So it was us, ACF, PUI, TGH, and Solidarity International. I can write
Okay.
those out for anybody who's interested. Yes, so that represented about 20% of our secured funding for this year. So when that disappeared, that was like, oh, okay, 20%, that sucks. I mean, for some of NGOs, it was 80-90% was USAID, particularly, DAR, BHA. So we felt the hit, but it wasn't cataclysmic to us. I mean, the thing, as I'm sure you know from your side, it was the on again, off again communication that was really challenging. It was very hard to plan when it was like, okay, no funding. Okay, life-saving funding. Life-saving work. But life-saving work's now defined as this. And not but also this is life-saving, but you can't have that. And that just meant we went back and I actually was on leave at the time and it ruined my holiday. So damn you, USAID. My poor operations manager who was just stepping in to help me out, covering me for a few weeks, had an awful time working out what was going back and forth. So yeah, the communication was challenging. As I said, things in that regard are settling down now. I mean, one of the big disappointments for us is we have an arm of Handicap International called Atlas Logistics. This is where we have common logistics services for other NGOs. So basically, we run the warehouse, we do the transportation, we basically do your logistics for you. And we really have the expertise of getting and distributing humanitarian aid right close to the front line, within 5 kilometers and even closer sometimes of the front line. And the funding we had for that at that time was entirely BHA. So the cost of BHA closing meant we had to close Atlas Logistics, which had an enormous impact on the wider humanitarian response, and most disappointingly on the local NGOs. So the big international NGOs could continue to do their own logistics, but the Ukrainian NGOs, which are really, really vital in any response, they just can't afford. They can't absorb the risk of going that close to the front line. They can't afford the warehouses and the trucks and the drivers and stuff. So that was really disappointing to see.
Yeah, I mean, we felt that from the inside too. It was kind of like, I don't know, just there was at a point where we were told that we weren't allowed to talk to any partners.
Yeah.
And there was even meetings that were set up like in the days after that was decreed where people that were supposed to show up to those meetings couldn't go, and then they couldn't inform their partners that they weren't showing up. So yeah, it felt really terrible from the inside too. And yeah, all the changes back and forth. But it's so not great on our end either, but yeah. Did you interface at all directly with anybody from the response?
No, so that consortium is led by PUI. So
Okay.
I liaise with PUI, PUI liaise with DARTS. But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, humanitarians adapt, right?
Have you heard anything about like State Department funding like coming through now, maybe through that consortium or something else? Because that's what's supposed to be going on now, right? Through the regional bureaus mostly.
We're hearing right now maybe actually a cost extension to the current project.
Oh, great.
So
Okay.
PUI lead have kind of rejigged the consortium a bit. It actually literally came this week. And are asking us to kind of propose, well, if there was a cost extension, what would we do? So we're not putting it in our planning for next year. Our budget for next year doesn't include any money from BHA State Department. But hey, if something comes, well, we'd love it. So yeah, there's whispers, but the shutdown doesn't help. That's the other thing. I didn't forgot about that.
You have
Layers
to
of furlough.
you have to lower your expectations as low
yeah.
as the US right now.
And I will say one interesting too, relating to a previous point that was brought up about local staff was actually, so I was a contractor working for a company on a contract with BHA, but they got a certain number of positions approved for the State Department to head over and continue like humanitarian work. They're now calling it the Humanitarian Assistance Support Contract instead of the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, but same kind of contract, just different names. And actually, instead of bringing back all of the like domestic U.S. workers, they shifted like about half of the positions they're bringing back to be foreign workers. So they're going to work on hiring people in country through our contract. And that's something totally new because they hadn't been doing that. You know, we had foreign service nationals at USAID, so
Yeah.
they were like employed by the US government, but working, you know, citizens of another country. But now they're going to be hired on through the contract. So even they're kind of seeing it too. And I wonder if that kind of same calculus was going in their mind, like it's less expensive, you know, we can have people on the ground actually in the country and kind of make up those missing slots that were taken away with the loss of USAID. So even there, it's happening.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I think one of the big changes is also going to be, so for example, in Ukraine, there's not been a humanitarian response here for that long. There's been a small one, but one thing Ukraine lacks is humanitarian capacity. They have amazing capacity in, you know, HR, corporate logistics, security, but they don't have much experience within the humanitarian sector. That is why actually a lot of people are beginning their careers here. It's a great place to come in as an international humanitarian, one of the few places you can. But countries such as, you know, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, you know, these have had humanitarian responses in some form for 30, 40 years. But there's people who have built their whole careers. Again, those are the kind of places where there's going to be more and more and more opportunities for national staff, I think.
Right. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody else? I know some other people had opened their mics before, then closed them. Rob, yes. Introduce yourself, Rob.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining us for this call. I really appreciate it. I'm Rob Grace. I teach in the Master's in Humanitarian Studies program at University of San Diego. I'm also the lead researcher for Watch List on Children in Armed Conflict. At University of San Diego, I teach about humanitarian negotiation, and I've done a lot of research on humanitarian negotiation. I'm just curious to hear your reflections on humanitarian negotiation as a skill and to what extent you see it as relevant in your work. I was interested in your comments about navigating all of the bureaucracy of Ukraine. I've done a case study of humanitarian access negotiation in Ukraine, so I'm very familiar with all the struggles on that front. But yeah, just interested to hear more about your reflections on those types of things in terms of engaging with authorities, engaging with other stakeholders, even engaging with colleagues within your own organization, and all that kind of stuff.
Thanks a lot. No, that sounds great. I think the first thing is, obviously, humanitarian negotiations remain a paramount part of the humanitarian industry. We always have to negotiate, almost always, with somebody to do something. There's almost no places where there isn't some kind of authority, de facto authority, some type of regulation, some type of control of humanitarians, and therefore negotiations are absolutely paramount. I don't see that changing. I only see that actually becoming more important as we move away from a world where humanitarians are just kind of given the space. Again, you can't just turn up with a van with a red cross on it and go, I'm a humanitarian, let me through. I mean, whether you ever could do that, I'm probably a bit too young, but I kind of have the image of that was what it was like maybe, you know, in 1920s, 30s, 40s, who knows? But definitely in the 21st century, you're seen with much more suspicion, you're questioned more. Most countries have a history of humanitarian response and they know that more how they want to control it or how they want to define, they want to use it politically, and it's always obviously aid can be, you know, can be a political tool for many groups. So I see the need for humanitarian negotiations being absolutely paramount and actually only getting more important and the negotiations getting more difficult. I think on the flip side of that, I'm seeing the industry putting much more focus on humanitarian negotiations. In fact, my organization put me through a mandatory humanitarian negotiations training. Actually, this week, one of my area managers has just said, can I go on a humanitarian negotiations training course? So there's a lot more recognition of its importance and also a lot more resources available, training courses, you know, research being done on it, a lot more kind of, as the humanitarian sector, we need to think about this as kind of one of the core competencies of our industry.
To piggyback on Rob's question, which was great, is the L word, leverage, right? Is that we're always thinking about what's the leverage that a humanitarian organization might have in negotiations. I mean, what type of leverage? I mean, leverage is like the ultimate leverage we're pulling out of the country unless conditions improve kind of thing. What have you seen on that end?
I think it really depends on the organizations. I mean, I think the current model of aid we have, where almost all the funding comes from institutional donors, quote unquote governments, it's pretty much synonymous, gives NGOs a lot less flexibility. I would like to see more organizations threaten to pull out and actually more pull out. I feel in a lot of responses we've lost our backbone this is my personal stance. It's not in any way reflected by Handicap International, but I think as a wider humanitarian response, I would like to see more principled and the ability to take, when negotiations fail, I feel we cave too quickly. I think we have much more leverage than we give ourselves credit for. I also would like to see humanitarian sector as more united. I think particularly Yemen was atrocious for this, of NGOs saying, yeah, we'll do that. We'll all have this common stance. And then one of them kind of goes around the back because it's got some funding that it must do because of this or that or the other. So yeah, in Ukraine, we're much better actually. In Yemen, I didn't feel we were that strong. But yeah, I think we have more leverage than we give ourselves credit for, and we should use that.
Let's take one more question if we can. One last question, and then I'll have a kind of a closing question for.
I'll ask another one.
Ian, yes, please go ahead.
When it comes to when you say the core technical skills, and I can see I think James has written something about it. I don't know why he's not asking. So you're saying for the international people, they should get this certain type of skills. So what about for people like me now who are coming from the global south and we are here and we also want to sort of fit in this now in the global north. So what skills should I take up, or so is it maybe skills like me being in the field back in the day, things like that? Like what skills?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think the main thing is you got to bring you got to understand the industry and you've got to bring something to it. Nobody is just hired now just to kind of like unload a truck. Something that anybody could do. So think about the way that a humanitarian organization is set up. So we're basically split into two types, and a lot of this is detailed actually on the website, which I can drop a link to. But you basically can think of kind of generalist skills and technical skills. So generalist skills are things like finance, HR, logistics, monitoring, evaluation, project management, project design, proposal writing, grant management, donor liaison. The kind of things that basically you can learn without having to have a specific degree in that area. The technical skills are things like medical, nutrition, shelter building, food security and livelihoods, cash programming. For most of those things, you can't really be a medical coordinator on a humanitarian project if you're not a doctor or a nurse. So let's say a water and sanitation project manager, they're not going to let me dig a well. They're just not going to. I haven't been to college as a water and sanitation engineer. So generally, you need to think about which one of those do you want to go down. Most people, you want to go the generalist route, unless you want to go back to college and train as a nutritionist. It's the generalist route that you're going. So therefore, the skills you're really looking for are, if you want to go into basically like just general management, it's really project management and the project cycle, but then particularly learn proposal writing, log frame, budget design. Bringing in money is one of the most important skills. So if you can prove to an organization that you can, that you can write a proposal, that you know how a log frame works, that you can design a program budget, that's instantly going to be one of the most important things they're looking for. And one thing anybody can do is look at small organizations and say, hey, can I, small, it could be any organization, a small local homeless shelter, and say, hey, can I write a proposal for you? Can I just have a look at your budgets or something? Getting that kind of skill and being able to put it on your CV, that you're able to say, I wrote this proposal for this organization, that's going to be an absolute, absolutely key going forward. I think just one of the things I do say to absolutely everybody, learn to use Excel. That is one of the best skills you can do. If you're not good at Excel, it's one of the most valuable ways you can use your time. The better at Excel you get, the better likelihood you are to get jobs. Almost every job in the sector, as you may or may not know, will give you a test to do alongside the interview. Passing the test is, at least early in my career, was way more difficult. I was able to talk the talk, but passing the test was more difficult. And that's basically because my Excel skills weren't good enough. I just couldn't do the formulas and stuff to work on the budget. Also learn to write really fast. Some of these tests are enormously long. The quicker you can blast out your ideas, and they obviously using AI checkers now. So learning to type and write your ideas out really quickly and succinctly and being good at Excel, those two things will go a long way. Just simple stuff like that.
You mentioned about grant writing, and I always say that to my students. I'm always disappointed how many graduate students don't know how to write a grant, don't even know
Yeah.
where everybody needs to know how to.
Yeah. There's no job in the sector where you're not going to need to know a log frame, where you're not going to need to know how to design a budget and write a narrative. No way. I see the question here on test preparation. There's no preparation you can do because each job will have its test and it's usually written by the recruiter. So you have no idea what's coming your way. Yeah. I've thought about that earlier in my career. Apart from basically, learn to write quick with good, be able to get your ideas out kind of quickly, get good at Excel, and learn stuff that they're obviously going to ask you. Like learn how to get very good at writing log frames. Almost any test for a project manager or something will have a log frame in it. So if you know, I mean, in my mid-20s, I would sit and write log frames on the metro just because I was like, okay, how good can I get at this? So, but it's not as. If it was, I'd tell you, but I'm afraid you can be very wacky tests, I'm afraid.
You're kind of answering my closing question was what pearls of wisdom would you offer? We've got about 3 minutes to go. Do you have like kind of crystallized 2 or 3 things you'd say? And particularly thinking about most of the students here, no, Vivian's Kenyan, but most of them are US based. It's not as easy as it used to be for Americans to kind of get out in the field. What would you say?
Really key ones. One is, and I don't want to end it in any way on a bomb note, but I think it's really worth saying it is very, very, very competitive. Don't delude yourself in that in any way. And it's only just got more competitive. You have to really, really, really want it. I mean, I always say to people, it's like when I started out, I wanted it more than I wanted to breathe. You've got to outcompete me, basically. And I really, really, really wanted it. So you've got to be willing to work hard. I used to go home and either apply for a job, or I'd read a book, or I'd watch a YouTube video. I just lived and breathed it. I just knew I had to. Maybe the art degree didn't help, but I had to kind of. So the first thing is you got to really, really want it. I think the second thing is you've got to apply for loads of jobs earlier on. I mean, I recommend to people 10 jobs a month minimum. If you're not applying for 10 jobs a month, you're way, 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 way too low.
Would you recommend Relief Web? I often send students to Relief Web.
Yeah. Relief Web has everything on it. Just 10 a month. Interestingly, I had a friend say the same number to me. They tried to do one every other day in their 20s, or they were trying to start their career. So that was 15 a month. Okay. Get those job applications, because it's just a numbers game. The more applications you send, the more interviews you get, the more jobs you'll get. And I think the last one is especially early in your career, you can't afford to be picky about the jobs. You got to get into the sector and hustle your way up. I have a lot of people say, I don't really want to go to that country. I don't really want to work for a bad organization. Earlier on, you got to take whatever you can get. And then you kind of carve the career by leapfrogging up from that. But, you got to kind of take what you can get and go from there.
So even being an art major doing travel, that's the way you start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, I was very lucky, but I mean, my first mission in Greece was I didn't join the humanitarian sector to go to a Greek island. I wanted to go to, the deserts of Iraq or the savannas of South Sudan. I didn't plan to sit on a Greek island, but it was the steps. So that's where I was.
So we're at 1 o'clock, but Jim, I'm going to allow you. It's got to be a really quick question, Jim.
Real quick question. So with regards to jobs not being out there, what about the opportunities that are the extreme ones that very few people actually are interested in doing initially to get your foot in the door? Do those extreme cases and how exist, and how do you get into them?
Even then, not as many as you would think. I mean, most people in the humanitarian sector, they want to do the extreme stuff. That's why they joined. I mean, definitely more. So it's not really the jobs, it's more the contexts. So, I mean, for me, a job in Sudan would be easier to get probably than a job in Ukraine. We're probably not the only people to have worked out, but sitting in Port Sudan and sitting in Kyiv, well, one's slightly nicer than the other. So that's when I kind of say, like, taking those opportunities. Also, if there's a big crisis, and obviously we hope there isn't, but that's when a lot of opportunities come up. So again, for me, the first big crisis of my career was Greece. It's where they were willing to send me, and it's where I would have gone anywhere. So if 6 weeks in Sudan isn't, if a 6-week contract in Sudan is not your dream job, take it. It's something. It's very much about leapfrogging and building up. opportunities lead to opportunities that lead to opportunities, and so on. And I think just to leave it on perhaps a slightly more positive note, the thing I always find with everybody's career in the humanitarian sector is that there's a tipping point when it suddenly becomes really, really easy to get jobs. And I think it's still the same case. It's different for different people. For me, it was probably nearer to 5 years, but I was longer than most. Most people say it's about 3 years. You have about 3 to 5 years of just struggle, and you're just banging your head against the wall and you're applying and you're not getting anything. And then you get something small, and then you get a little bit more, and then you get this job, and then it has this sudden flip where they're offering you jobs. I mean, for example, in 2017, I applied for 160 jobs, and I knew because everyone was a tailored application. I had a file on my computer that had 160 files in it. So it's basically one every other day. I couldn't get a job to save my life. By 2020, I was the head of mission in Bangladesh for one of the largest French NGOs. And it was like 36 months between those two things, because I'd literally have got a break, and then boom, they literally were like, no, we want you to do this now. So, okay, amazing. So you just got to persevere. But what I say to people is it's really a when, not an if. If you want it enough and you keep applying and you keep hustling and you keep learning the skills, there's still enough jobs out there for everybody. It is a when, not an if.
One of the things you remind me of is language, right? Americans are unilanguage. Maybe they know Spanish. I'm assuming you know some French and English, right? Get a second language, right?
I do not speak a word of any other language. I'm controversial in saying that languages are not that important.
Oh, okay.
In fact, I would say that unless you already speak another language, it is not a good use of your time to learn another language for the sector.
Okay.
The main thing is that learning a language to the level you would need to. So for me to learn French to go to Francophone Africa would take a huge amount of my time and energy, which would be better spent earlier in my career learning Excel, learning budgets, learning log frames. I can't learn everything, I've only got so much time in the world.
Right.
Learn French good enough for it to actually make a difference. If you already speak, amazing. But I don't think it's a good use of it's not going to make enough of a difference to your application, actually.
An hour learning Excel is better than learning an hour learning.
100%. Yeah. Unless you're really gifted at languages and you learn them very easy and you enjoy it, I don't think it's the best use.
We're at time. Duncan, if you want to share any information, contact information, please do it in the chat.
Yes.
Let me close out by thanking Duncan and really appreciate his time in spending an hour with us today. If he puts down some contact information, that would be great, or at least something about reaching Handicap International. We will be posting this on YouTube. It'll take us a few days to do it. We've got another event coming up on December the 5th, which is our International Peacebuilding in Humanitarian Seminar. It's a one-day. It's got different activity. We've got 10 different sessions going on. That's on our website also. In the spring, we just recently received a grant, the Forage Center from Biosophical Institute, and we're going to be doing a one-day virtual humanitarian education program sometime in the spring and an in-person reception in the Washington area. So look for that also. And then next summer, we'll be doing our exercise again. So again, thank you, Duncan.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Okay. We're going to call today and look for this being posted soon. Good night.
Thanks, David.